All right. Well, we are going to get going. So I will pull it up on the screen for you guys at home to be able to at least see what we're talking about here, if you don't have a copy of it. And we're going to go through and talk about how to fill it out and answer any questions and things that you guys might have. So this first page is just the NLS printout that we were using. So we're going to start right up in here. All right. So here's how we're going to do this. So the idea of today is we're going to go through and just really hit on the blank line section and talking about what should be filled in there and where do you get it from, the information, how to best go about doing it. Along the way, I want to answer any questions that you guys have as well. But feel free to stop me if we do get to a section that you have some questions on. And it's because what I mean by that is the idea of today. So Rob went through kind of each of the sections with you guys a week and a half ago or so. So I'm not going to do that. Today is more about how to fill it out and what to put in the boxes and those type of things. So when we get to some of the sections, if there's not a box or anything to fill out, more than likely, we're probably just going to skip that section unless you guys have questions. Now, I want to start with, on this one, the same thing that I told you guys on both the buyer packet and the seller packet, where what I recommend for you is you should read through this entire thing at least once if you have not ever done it. And I would recommend sitting down with a highlighter or just a pencil or pen that you could write down some questions if you have them. But you should go through and read this at least once, making sure that you understand what it says, because you're expected to know it as you work through it with your clients. Now, the other thing that I've learned along the way is that sometimes you might read through this, but a section might not really mean that much to you, but until later on when there's an issue that comes up on the contract. And so my thinking always is, when an agent comes to me and says, hey, I got a question about this deal, and then they will say, whatever, and they'll say, so what do you think? My first question is always, well, what does the contract say? Because we have to follow what the contract says. So that's kind of where I'm coming from of we need to understand what it says. But with that being said, there are scenarios that sometimes you'll read the contract, and based on the scenario that you're in, you might be like, oh, I don't really know for sure what that means. So anyway, all right, so here's what we're going to do. So the very first, we're going to kind of just go a blank line at a time and see if you guys think there's a problem with it. And if there is, then we'll talk about it. If there's not, then we either won't talk about it or I'll tell you just kind of what you need to know about it. All right, so on this first one here, we've got on this 9th day of October, 2017. Any concerns with that? And I'll assume that silence means no. So, and I'm not probably keeping as good of an eye on the chat box as I should. So if you guys notice something in there that I should be hitting on from a comment or something, then let me know, but I'll try to keep an eye on it as well. All right, so yeah, nothing wrong with that. Now, let me explain to you, though, the thing that you need to make sure you understand. So you'll notice to the right of where it has that date, the 9th of October, 2017, you'll notice in parentheses here that it says offer reference date. That offer reference date becomes important because later on, as we get to where we'll see some addendums in here. Anytime you are doing a counteroffer or an addendum, it will ask for the offer reference date. That's the date it's referring to, is whatever date that is. Now, I have a property, my neighbor up the street's home that is, we're actually signing on it today after class. And throughout the process, the other agent has sent me addendums. And as he has sent me an addendum, almost every time on the addendum for the offer reference date, he has put a different date. And to some extent, I think what sometimes people will do is on the addendum, they think the offer reference date is the date the contract was actually signed, which may or may not be the same date as this date up here. So just keep in mind where that shows offer reference date, that is the date, this date that's right here is the date that we are going to use on every addendum that we're going to use. Okay, so that's the importance of that. Next line, Billy Bob Buyer. Now, we talked about from the buyer packet class where we should get the buyer's name. So just to make sure, where do we get the name for the buyer that we're going to put on here? How do we know what to put there?
You can click on the tax ID on the MLS printout.
Okay, so for the seller, I would agree. That's where we would want to get the seller's name.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're good. But for the buyer, where do we want to get what we're going to put as the there?
You can look at a driver's license, and there was something else.
Yeah, perfect. So we want to do it off of the, however they applied for the loan. Whatever name they use to apply for the loan is what we want to have here. Now, when we talked about it on the buyer packet, it wasn't as crucial on the buyer broker agreement. But on this one, the lender typically is going to want the name on the real estate purchase contract to match the name that is on the loan application. So find out, just ask them if they've applied for the loan. If they have, what was the name that they did it under? So that's where we want to get that here. Okay, good. So then the seller, which we just talked about, is typically on the MLS. You can click on the tax ID number, or down in the MLS there's a spot. Let me back up for you guys that are online here, that you can see right here where it has owner. On this particular page, there's nothing filled in there, but that a lot of times the agent will put in who the owner is, and you could use that as well. Now, here's the thing. And I just had this recently where clicking on the tax ID number. So I think I'd mentioned to you guys, I helped my sister buy a condo last month. And on that one, when I clicked on the tax ID number, it had, and I can't remember what the name of the property owner was now, but it was something that was more like a company. And so I had put that on the MLS, or excuse me, the REPC, when I filled out the purchase contract. But then when the agent did a counter offer back to me, he actually put a different name on there for the seller. So then we had to go do another addendum to fix the error that I had made by putting that company name or whatever. But that came as a result of just clicking on the tax ID number. So just know that most of the time the tax ID number is correct, but it's not 100%. And in fact, if I had to guess, I would say it's probably right 90 to 95% of the time, but there is that 5 to 10% of the time that it's not going to be correct, in which case you'll probably have to do an addendum to fix it. So that's where we're going to, yeah, go ahead.
So with regards to that seller box, I've seen it with a lot of agents where they'll just put like owner of record or owner on record. And I mean, I understand, like, I think that's just really lazy, but I'm not sure if that needs to be clarified in an addendum or if that's actually acceptable, as long as we can, you know what I mean? Like, I'm trying to figure out.
Yeah.
On every deal that I've done where they've done that, I've had to clarify in the addendum, just because we've had another addendum for something else, but I just add that in just to save time. Is that something that we have to have clarification on right at the off, or is that acceptable to put owner of record and just leave it as that at that?
Yeah, good question. So in the event you can, so I'm with you. I think for the most part, it is people just kind of being lazy is why they put owner of record there, but it does work. So it would be okay to put that there, but, and I don't know that I've ever seen a scenario that you've had to go back and fix it. But I do feel like it is just kind of somebody being a little lazy by not trying to find out. Now, here's the other thing that I say is, for me, I always think it is a good idea for you to call the listing agent and ask them a few questions anyway. And so one of the questions that I ask when I call is, what do you want me to put on the offer as the name of the seller? So that's typically the way I like to do it, is just call the listing agent. And I'll point out to you along the way the other things that I like to ask about. But while we're on it right now, the other thing to do when you're going to be writing an offer, especially in today's market, is to call and ask the other agent, what is your seller looking for? How can I make my offer the strongest? What is going to be most important to them? And obviously price is probably going to be important, But in addition to price, what else is going to be important to your seller that I should, to make our offer stronger, make sure to include on there? So, so I think that's good thing to ask the seller as well. So what, or excuse me, the listing agent, what's important to the seller and what name should I be put on there? And then I'll point out some other things along the way.
Perfect. Thanks, Russ.
Yep. All right. Next then is the earnest money. So on each of these lines from now on, I'm kind of going to just ask you guys, is there any concerns there? So any concerns on the earnest money of the $1,000 there? Okay. I'm hearing no. So good. What, and then what about in the form of personal check number 567? Any concerns there?
I'd rather have it be a cashier's check, but
You don't need to put a number there.
Okay, good. So David's saying we don't need to put the number. Marissa's saying that she'd rather it be a cashier's check, which would probably agree with you on that. So here's the thing. There's nothing wrong with how I did it that way. And in fact, the reason I put it that way, let me explain to you why I did it that way. Now, for years and years and years, the way that I did it, and it's a little different now because so many times when we're doing our offers, we're doing it through a dot loop or a DocuSign. And so typically we're not always collecting that earnest money right up front. But how I did it, the reason I put it on there this way is this is the way that I always would do it, is when we would write an offer, we would usually be sitting in a conference room at the office, and I would say to the buyer, all right, how much did you want to do in earnest money? And they'll usually ask you, how much should I do in earnest money? And the rule of thumb that I like to use is 1%. So really in this particular property, I'd say somewhere around between 2,000 and 2,500 is probably the ideal. But also in this price range, it's not uncommon to see $1,000, which is why I did it up this way. But what I would do with the buyer is sitting in the conference room is I would say to them, okay, great. You want to do $1,000 in earnest money. What's the check number that you're going to give me? Now, what do you think that they would do as soon as I said, what's the check number? What?
nowadays they'd probably be like, I don't even know where I'm gonna find my checkbook. It's probably in a shoebox in the back of my closet.
Right. So yeah, which that is kind of the point, is in today's world, they are like, I don't even know where my checkbook is. That's why I'm saying it's probably not as crucial in today. But for years and years, I would say that. And what they would do is they would go, oh, and they would pull out their checkbook and tell
write
me
the
what
check.
Number is. And then what they would do next is then fill out the earnest money check. And I liked doing it that way. To me, if I still had my druthers on it, I would rather have them give me an earnest money check at the time of me writing the offer, for me personally, just to eliminate that step of having to worry about it. So here's the thing. It doesn't really matter just what you put in there. Just make sure you know what they're going to do. And if it is going to be a cashier's check, which is great, because then we don't have to worry about it bouncing or anything. What about this question for you, though? What if they want to give you cash? What do you think?
I say negative.
All right. I'm hearing 2 no's. What about you guys online?
How can I prove that?
I thought it had to be a check or a cashier's check or like I used the Earnest app the other day and it was a wire, but I thought we couldn't accept cash.
That's exactly right. Now, technically, as far as the law is concerned, we could accept cash. But just in terms of us as a company, we don't want cash. So if somebody tries to give you cash, have them go to 7-Eleven and get an official or what are they called?
Money order?
Money order or something like that. So, I mean, we would rather have something like that. And here's the funny thing is, and maybe you guys won't think it was funny, but I did. I had an agent one time that took some cash as their earnest money. This was years ago. And one of the things that we would do for a long time is when somebody would give us the earnest money check, you would go and make a copy of it so that you had proof, which to some extent, I mean, we still do keep that in the file, a copy of the check. But this agent had taken cash and I went walking by the copy machine and they were standing there making photocopies of the cash. And I was like, I think that might be against the law to photocopy the money. But anyway, all right. So on the Earnest Money, whatever it's going to be, whether you're using the Earnest app or you're going to have them give you a check, just put in there what the plan is of how they're going to get you the Earnest Money. All right.
Can I ask a question about Earnest Money?
Absolutely.
If there's two buyers that are going to be on the loan and you use the Earnest app, can you, and they want to do 50-50 out of each bank account so they're not moving too much money around, can we use the Earnest app to request the full amount from two separate bank accounts?
Oh, that's a
Or
good,
does it all have to come out of one?
yeah, I'm not sure if that's a good question on that. But Marissa brings up a good point, because you used to be a processor, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, she was a processor. So she brings up a good point. Is she's saying, check with your loan officer before you do that. And the reason being is because it's going to create potentially a headache for them, because they have to verify where the Earnest Money came from and things. So
Got it. Thank you.
So ultimately, from the loan officer standpoint, they don't want you to do it sounds like. But I don't know enough. I haven't used Earnest. That program is still fairly new to us. So I've never tried to do that. So I would assume you could, but I don't know. But it sounds like check with the loan officer, because they might tell you don't do that. All right. Next then. So the offer to purchase property, and then it's got 123 Easy Street. Any concerns with, and let's just do that whole section. So we're not going to do just that blank line, but the whole address section and the tax ID number. Any concerns with what I put on there?
I thought it was perfect.
Okay, good. So again, I'm hearing no in person and nothing from you guys online. So we'll assume you think it's good, and I would agree. I think that's fine how it was done. Next then, the next section down is section 1.2. Other included items. Any concerns with that section?
Yeah.
Okay, David's got a concern.
Because on the listing says exclusions, range, and refrigerator. So then you have it on the included items.
Okay, good. So he's saying, just make sure you guys heard him online. He's saying on the MLS, it shows that the refrigerator and the range are excluded, but on here we've got the box checked. So what do the rest of you guys think? Agree? Disagree?
I mean, it's an offer, I understand that.
Did we lose you guys online? Did I mute? Nobody? Did I mute?
I agree.
You agree? Okay. All right. So what David just said that you guys may not have heard was it is an offer. So here's the thing is, yes, on the MLS it's showing excluded. We've checked the box here for included. Now, the reason I did that is because this actually happens more often than you would guess. That what happens is that an offer is sent, and then what happens is somebody comes back later on the seller side and says, hey, we put on the MLS that the refrigerator wasn't included. But the REPC shows that it is included. So if the MLS says not included and the REPC says included, then what?
Well, as a seller agent, I should.
The REPC rules.
To me, actually.
Did it? Okay, yeah. So yeah, the REPC rules. That's a good way of thinking about it. REPC rules. Yeah, whatever is on the real estate purchase contract is what really matters. So the other thing David said, which I think is really crucial for you guys, is just exactly that of, I know for me, so I'm going to speak from my own personal experience, but I believe this happens a lot. When I get an offer in, I'm usually just excited about getting an offer. And so as soon as the offer comes in, think about it for you guys that have done this and that you haven't. Imagine though, you get an offer in, what's usually the first thing you're going to look at?
Offer price.
Yeah, good. So good. I had 3 people say it. So the purchase price, that's usually the first thing we look at. And the reason we look at that is because we want to make sure, okay, we're going to be able to put the deal together. What's the second thing you look at?
Seller paid.
Okay, so seller paid closing costs.
Dates.
For me, date. I'm with you.
Schedule dates. Yeah.
Yep. next thing I usually want to know is, when am I getting paid? So first is, am I going to get paid? Is the offer price going to get me paid? And then the second thing is, when is that going to happen? And then typically what happens is we're like, at that point we're going, okay, good. I'm going to get paid and it's going to happen in time. I can make my Mercedes payment. So I'm going to be okay. And then we go meet with our seller. So what David brought up is a very, very good point. Is you want to make sure you're checking all this other stuff, because unfortunately what happens is we get so excited because the price looks good, the dates look good. We go sit down with our seller and we go through it and they go, yep, sounds good. And we sign it, and then the seller moves out and they take the refrigerator with them, and the buyer moves in and says, hey, where's the refrigerator? And the seller says, well, they turn to you as the agent and they're going to say, I told you that wasn't going to be included. Well, but it was on the REPC. So make sure you're checking, because otherwise, so David, what happened on yours? Were you on the buy side or the seller side?
So
And what happened?
I had to eat $1,200.
It cost him $1,200. It cost him $1,200 is basically what he just said. So that's just it. And here's the good news. That will never happen to you again. Yeah, he'll never you will always make sure you check this, because I've been there. I've had it happen to me too. So I feel your pain. I know, because I've had it happen to me too, where I just you get excited. You don't notice that, oh, shoot. Now, here's the other thing I want to point out is specifically notice that on the box that's checked, it says refrigerators. And sometimes where agents will miss that is maybe we put on here the MLS that we're going to exclude the one in the kitchen, but the one in the basement or the garage will be included. Well, if you look at this, it says refrigerators, plural. So if it's got multiple, they are both included if you don't exclude them. So, all right. Hopefully that's enough on that section. But yeah, so learn from mine and David's mistake. Don't let that happen to you. But the good news is, if it does, it only happens once. Because that, when you have to end up spending the money for that, you go, yeah, I'm checking that stuff again. All right. And here's the other side of it though, for real. Like, honestly, I still do sometimes not always look at it till I'm really reviewing it with the seller. And then is when I will catch it. But, all right. Next, as still part of that section, is there anything else you noticed in there? There's one more thing that we missed.
The above check item shall be conveyed to the buyer under a separate bill of sale.
Okay. Keep going.
The what rate?
Before that. Still in section 1.2.
You got to check are or are not.
Perfect. Yeah. Thanks, Kyle. Yeah. I missed checking the box for either there are additional items or there are not additional personal property items. So for me, now again, I don't necessarily teach people to do this, but when I learned how to fill out the REPC, the way my broker manager taught me is, he said he would always put an X in the box that was the one you were using and a circle in the one that you weren't, or like an O or a 0. And for a long time, I would fill out these contracts that way. And the idea of it for me was that way you didn't ever miss something. If you put something in every one of these, either an O or an X, I don't think you necessarily need to do that. But just make sure, it's always a good idea to scan over it to make sure you didn't miss something in there, because it happens from time to time. And the good news is you can always fix it later on by doing an addendum to the contract. All right, next. Any concerns on section 1.3, the excluded items? Yeah, no, nothing on that. So but here's the thing that I want to just mention to you on it is, if you are excluding things or there are things you want excluded, then I would list them in there. And for me, this is always another reminder. I think I said this to you guys before, but when you are on the seller side, if there are things they want to exclude, I typically will recommend to them to get them out of the property before you even list it, just so that it's not going to be an issue as to the buyer. And there are just going to be scenarios where the buyer comes in and just says, well, I won't buy your house then if you don't include whatever. And so I just found it's better just to get rid of it right off the bat. All right, next, water service. Any concerns in section 1.4? I'll take that as a no. All right, and just the reminder on this one again, that if nothing is listed there, that the property shall include all water rights or water shares, if any, that are a legal source of the seller's current culinary water service. So the key words on that is it a legal source for them? So just know if there are water shares or water rights, it is going to be included. So one quick story that I'll give you on that. I helped my sister sell the same sister that I helped buy this. It's been a few years, but when I helped her sell her home up by Heber City, she had some water shares. But in the time that she had bought that house until she had sold it, the city had come through and put in water meters. So she had a water share so they could use X amount of water for free. And then if you went above it, well, now it's metered and you would just pay for anything above the amount of water that was included in the water share. So it's now time to sell her property. So technically, she did not need to sell that as part of of purchasing the home, because it was now had a meter. And so the new buyer could just use whatever water they wanted. They would just have to pay for it. Because of that, my sister just said, what do you think? Should we include the water share or not? Now, what would you guys say in that scenario? Should she include the water share and put it on the MLS as it being included or not?
What's the benefit of having it?
So yeah, so what is the benefit to her keeping it? She wasn't going to go buy another house, so it's not like she was going to be in the same water district and use it. So what would be an advantage to keeping it?
I think there is one.
Okay.
I don't know.
So here's what I would say. My experience is, and I would say kind of the same thing about a refrigerator to some extent, but typically the buyer is not going to place extra value on that water share. Now that's not 100% true, but in this scenario, the buyer's not going to buy the house thinking about necessarily the water share, meaning when they make the offer, they're going to just want you to include it. And they're probably not going to pay more for the house for it. So I told my sister, let's not include it. And let's put on the MLS that it's excluded, but that they could purchase it if they want to. We got an offer. On the offer, they put down that the water share would be included at the price. I countered it back and said, we'll do that price, but the water is not included, but the buyer could purchase it outside of closing if they wanted to. And the other agent came back and said, well, they're not sure. They want to think about it. Great. So we get the property under contract. In the process of that, after, I don't know, a couple of weeks, the buyer's agent came back to me and said, hey, the buyer would like to purchase that water share. I said, okay, great. I'll talk to my sister. I got off the phone with that agent. I called up my sister and said, hey, they do want to buy the water share. How much do you want to sell it for? And my sister said, oh, we already sold it to the neighbor. Which I was like, thanks for consulting with me. We probably should have at least given the buyer the chance to purchase it. But what ended up happening was they were fine with it.
How much you sell it?
I think she sold it for like $2,000, something like that. I can't remember exactly, but anyway, so it ended up not being that big of a deal. But the thing is, just at the end of the day, she got probably $2,000 that she wouldn't have gotten for that water share by doing it the way she did. I was a little frustrated that she didn't at least call me and say, will you call the buyer and ask them if they want to buy it before I sell it to the neighbor? And anyway.
But didn't they say no?
Yeah, they had said they were okay with not getting it. So they didn't cancel the contract. It was fine and everything. But I'm sure to this day though, they probably are still like, I wish we would have bought that water share, but anyways. All right, so just the main thing for you guys to remember on that is that it is included unless you exclude it on the line. All right, next, purchase price. In section 2 there, so we're gonna do 2.1 right now. Well, actually, let's include 2.2. Do you guys see any concerns in that section?
Yeah,
Okay, what's the concern?
well, if you add all that, it's 248.
Okay, good. So David's saying if you add up A through E, it's going to equal 248, not 247. Yeah, which is correct. So here's the thing. What most,
Count the earnest money.
yeah, that's right. So what most agents do, most of the time how agents will fill this out is they will put the earnest money, and then new loan they'll put TBD, and balance of the purchase price in cash at settlement, TBD, and then they'll put purchase price 247. And I'm back to what Darren said earlier. It's just people being a little bit lazy. Now, so here's the thing, and especially in today's market, with what's going on in the market right today, I would highly recommend to you guys to actually fill this out with what the plan is. Now, I also want to point out that up above in where it has 2.1, right below where the 247 is on the line on kind of the right hand side, which, so you guys that are online, if you look at right here, it shows any amount shown in section 2.1C and E may be adjusted as deemed necessary by the buyer and the lender. So keep in mind, the reason I think a lot of times people just put TBD in there is because you can adjust it however you want. The buyer and the lender can just decide we're going to do more of a down or less of a down, and whatever they want to do. But my recommendation for you is in today's market, I would put down what their plan really is, because that could be the difference. If I'm the listing agent and I get one that has TBD for the down payment, and I get another one that's showing $100,000 that they're putting down, I'm probably going with the one that's got $100,000 down. So just kind of keep that in mind, that you can adjust it however you want to adjust it, but give them an idea what's going on, because it will make a difference. I had a property, this is years ago, but the market was somewhat similar to where it is now, that this was a property up on South Mountain, and we ended up accepting the offer because one had filled it out and the other one had not. So, and the one who didn't was ticked because the home ended up selling for actually less than what his offer was for. But there were extenuating circumstances, but partially we didn't go with his offer though, just because he just put TBD rather than what he was really going to do. All right. So fill those out as best as you can. All right, section 2.2. Any concern there? Yeah, no concern. So here's the key thing though. If you do check the box as is, then notice right after where the is or is not box is, it says, if checked in the affirmative, so let me, you guys that are online, I'll highlight it. If checked in the affirmative, the terms of the attached subject to the sale of buyer's property addendum apply. So what does that mean?
It means they have something to sell before they're going to be approved for their next loan.
Okay, good. It means they've got a house to sell, but if you read that last sentence, what does it mean for us?
The terms of the attached subject to the sale of the buyer's property, there's an addendum.
There, yeah, it means we have to use an addendum. So if you check the box as is, you have to use the addendum. Sometimes agents will say, well, we checked the box is, saying that it is conditioned upon the sale of their home, and they think that's good enough. If you're going to check the is box, notice that it says the terms of the attached addendum, attached subject to sale of buyer's property addendum apply, which means you got to use that. All right. Next then. So, any concerns with the initials on there? Anybody have? Nope. All right.
Update.
So yeah, so David said there's not a date. There actually is a date.
Oh,
It's just, it is underneath, but so yeah. Okay. Next then, let's go. So we're gonna go to section 3.3. Now again, if you guys have other questions, stop me. Otherwise, I'm just gonna kind of cruise along. Section 3.3. Any concerns with that?
3.3?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, what's your concern?
Well, again, it says here, well, I don't know. On the listing it says possession recording.
Okay, so David's saying that the MLS says recording for possession, and this one put 24 hours.
But I guess, again,
Yeah, it's back to that same
Isn't
thing.
that just like being courteous and giving them an extra 24 hours?
That's right. Probably that's what it is just being courteous on it. So here's the thing. Here's what I want to talk with you guys about this. So who is responsible during that 24-hour period? Okay, so Marissa's saying the seller.
If it's already been recorded, wouldn't it be the buyer?
Okay, so we have another
Seller's
person
not.
saying the buyer. So who's responsible, seller or buyer? What do the rest of you think? All right, Marissa's sticking with seller.
I think it's seller.
David's saying seller.
Because it says a seller shall deliver.
All right, let's fast forward and I'll see if you guys change your mind. Remember I said to you, it typically when there's a question there a problem, I would say, what does the contract say? Let's go see what the contract says. So I'm gonna fast forward down here to section 20. Let's read through section 20. Here's what it says. As of closing, buyer shall be responsible to obtain casualty and liability insurance coverage on the property in amounts acceptable to the buyer and the buyer's lender if applicable. If prior to closing, any part of the property is damaged or destroyed by fire, vandalism, flood, earthquake, or an act of God, the risk of such loss or damage shall be borne by the seller, provided however the cost of the. All right. So did you change your mind?
They're both responsible for two different things.
Okay, so during that 24-hour period, who's responsible?
He says us.
The buyer, because it's already been recorded.
Buyer.
That is correct. Sorry.
Busted.
Yeah. But that's where I'm saying to you guys, we always want to go back to, well, what does the contract say? And why I say it's so important that we at least read through it at least once to have a little bit of an understanding on it. But so here's the thing. Here's the point of that. During that 24-hour period, the seller's probably still got possession of the property, but now the buyer is responsible for something that goes wrong with it. So you may want to think that through of do we really want to give them that long, or should we say upon recording we get possession? And it is a balancing act. There's not a right answer, by the way. I know one agent that if you took him an offer on his listing and you put 24 hours, he's going to counter you back. And he stays really, really firm on this of 72 hours. He's going to say, nope, my seller gets 72 hours. We want 72 hours. So it just becomes a negotiation. So just keep that in mind. But the reason he does 72 hours, he doesn't want his sellers to be rushed to have to get out of the property, which is fine. But when you look at section 20, then you'd go, well, wait a minute though. If I'm the buyer though, I'm now responsible if something catches on fire. I mean, hopefully you got insurance, but it's your insurance company that now has to deal with it, not theirs. So just, you got to decide. So as a general rule for me, I usually do 24 hours. Doesn't mean it's right, but I usually will do 24 hours if the property is occupied. If it's vacant, I 100% put upon recording. And so to some extent, there probably is some wisdom in saying doing upon recording. But for me, if the property is occupied, I usually do 24 hours. And I'll say more about how I try to deal with that in section 25 or section 24 when we get there. But of how I try to not have to deal with it, even though I gave him 24 hours. So I'll say more about that later. All right, next then, section 4.2, special assessments. Any concerns there with section 4.2?
Didn't show there was an HOA on the MLS.
Okay, good. So Marissa's saying it doesn't show that there's an HOA. So what would that mean then?
Probably doesn't even need to be put in there.
Okay, so she's saying it maybe doesn't need to be checked at all. What do the rest of you think?
I've done it where it wasn't an HOA and I didn't check anything because there was no HOA.
Okay. Okay, so remember I always say, go back to the contract. What does it say? Let's see what it says. Any assessments for capital improvements as approved by the homeowners association or as assessed by a municipality or special improvement district prior to settlement deadline shall be paid for by. So what was the or? Assessed by a municipality, the city, or a special improvement district. So even though it's not part of an HOA, it is possible that a home that isn't part of an HOA could still have some type of an assessment from either a special improvement district, meaning the water company, or the city somehow even. Now, it doesn't happen very often, but so I would say don't ever skip it and leave it blank. I always just check the seller box. Every single time I'm gonna check seller because I'm saying I want the seller to be responsible. Let me give you a quick example of where that paid off for me. Now this property did happen to be within an HOA. My nephew, in fact, my sister that I keep talking about, her son, I don't know why that family keeps coming up in this conversation. I don't know why, but her son, I helped him buy a townhouse down in Orem, and in purchasing it, it wasn't part of the HOA, but Utopia had gone through in Orem and had put in like fiber internet or I don't know enough about it, but yeah, fiber optics or something. I don't know. Anyway, and the people all had a choice that you either paid for it up front or you could make payments on it. Well, as a result of us putting this in here, it ended up being the seller had to be responsible for it. They tried to get us to just take over the payments, but because I knew that we had this in there, I said, no, we're not. You are responsible to make that payment before, at the time of closing. So, and it was about $1,500 or something they still owed. I don't remember exactly, but so anyway, that's why I would just say, don't leave it blank, check the box. And I always just check seller that if there is something that pops up, great, the seller gets to pay for it. Now, if I'm on the seller side, I might not want it to be that way. All right, next. What about down in section 4.3, the HOA entity, all that kind of stuff? What do you think there? Yeah, same thing for me. I just always check seller, even though it's not this, in this scenario is where you can more likely say, well, it's not part of an HOA. But again, for me, if I'm representing my buyer, I'm just going to check the seller box because it's not going to hurt anything to have that check. All right. Next then, section 5. Any concerns in section 5? I obviously did not create enough errors on this.
I know.
Nobody's saying.
Yeah, I was actually shocked at how little errors there were.
All right, well, then how about if I shock you and say there is an error?
Oh, I remember the buyer's brokerage isn't checked.
There you go. Good job. So what were you asking about putting a dash where? Oh, okay. So yeah, now here's the interesting thing. This is probably the most common one that I have seen, is that people forget to check that particular box on the buyer's brokerage. And I don't know why. I don't know if it was something on the MLS or what, but for whatever reason, I tend to see that box missed. So yeah, on this one, just making sure you're checking the box there for who's representing who. All right, good. Any other concerns on that page? All right, the next page then, and I'm going to skip over, really, I'm even going to skip section 7. I know Rob spent a bunch of time on it, so I'm gonna skip that one. If you did have something else you wanted included as part of seller disclosures, put it on this other line, but we're gonna skip that. All right, how about section 8.1? Concerns there? Now, here's the thing that I'll just say. For me, on this one, it is gonna be pretty rare that I would ever check is not. Like, I'm gonna make it conditioned upon an inspection. The only time I would say not to do that, well, 2 times. Yeah, if your client says no, then do no. But yeah, if you were buying a property that you're gonna go rehab, is what David was saying. If I was gonna buy one I'm gonna rehab, then I probably would be okay in checking the is not. But even then, I probably would say I want at least, to have checked it out a little bit. But there may be a time that your buyer is the contractor and they walk through and they're like, nope, I want to make it not contingent upon that because I know I'm going to rip the whole thing apart anyway. So, all right. Next then, down in section 8.1 under, or sorry, 8.2, appraisal condition. Any concerns there? When would you do is not on that? There is an answer to this one, by the way. When would you do is not?
All cash purchase.
Good. Yeah, the only time I would do it is if it's an all cash, but even then, you still might want to put, the buyer doesn't have to do one just because you said that it is conditioned upon it, but you at least have the option to do one. But so
Is
again,
it like if you're waiving the appraisal clause so that you can have a stronger offer?
yeah, that would be, if you were to waive that, but again, that also then takes away your ability to cancel based on it. So just make sure the seller, or excuse me, the buyer knows that if that's what you're gonna do. So, all right, any other concerns on that page? All right, next page then. Section 8.3. Any concerns in 8.3? Nope. Okay. So yeah, financing is required. So we check that box. Obviously, if it was cash, you would do the no financing required. Also in section 8.3 B, you've got the blank line where it's got 0 saying how much of the earnest money will be released to the seller. So in the event that the buyer gets past their due diligence deadline and they decide to cancel, but it's before the finance and appraisal deadline, they would give up X amount of dollars. So I typically am going to put 0 in there. If I'm on the seller side, I don't want to see 0. On the buyer side, I want to put 0 because that means the earnest money is not at risk. And I have not seen a whole lot of people having issue with that when you're putting 0 in there. But if I was on the listing side and I'm getting multiple offers, I would be saying, hey, I want to see somebody being willing to give up their earnest money if they can't qualify. So, or if they cancel based on finance and appraisal. So just kind of so you guys know. All right, section 8.4. Any concerns there?
Additional earnest money says 500, but the will not box is checked.
Perfect, good. So what does that mean? Do they have to do the 500 or they don't do the 500? What do you think?
They don't.
Correct. Yeah, so notice though, it's saying the buyer will not do an additional earnest money amount of 500. So they're just saying, I'm not going to give you an extra 500, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So if you're going to check will not, put 0 or an NA or something. If they are going to do that, then check the will box. Which, so again, in our current market, if you're trying to get your offer accepted, it probably would be a good idea to check the will box and say, we'll give you additional earnest money once we get past our due diligence deadline to show how serious that we are about it, okay? All right, section 9. Any concerns in section 9? There should be.
Specify what the other amendment is.
Yeah, so there, well, so really what on this, what we should do is be checking addendum number. So checking that box and then putting number 1 in there. Because there was another addendum. So the idea of this is just always think about, and I don't know if maybe this piece has just always made sense to me, that for some reason, a lot of agents, it doesn't make as much sense. And I don't know if it's because I worked at a bank before I came into real estate, but I am just really big on making sure there's a clean paper trail. That if you ended up in court, a judge could look at it and follow, yeah, I know exactly what's going on. I understand how many addendums should be here and everything. So for me, it's just about a paper trail of making sure that you're leaving that paper trail. So on this, just checking the R, checking the addendum number, putting number 1, and then also the FHAB. Good. All right, section 10. Any concerns there? Yeah, no concerns there. So the way I like to do it is to just say that there will be one. It'll be ordered by the buyer, the company selected by the buyer, and paid for by the seller. That's how I like to do it. Now, let me give you a horror story. So I was helping my cousin buy a property, and man, all my problems, it seems like our family members, huh? All right. So I was helping my cousin buy a property. And we checked the boxes just as this is. I said it would be ordered by the buyer, a company selected by the buyer, but paid for by the seller. Well, the seller countered us back and said, we already have ordered a home warranty through, and I don't remember what company it was, and probably better that I don't tell you anyway, but through such and such company. And I went to my cousin and said, what do you think? And he said to me, well, what do you think? And I said, well, I've never used them, so I don't really know. So, I mean, it's probably going to be fine, but what do you want to do? And he said, well, that's fine. We'll just use their home warranty company. So we closed. We had used their home warranty company. He moved in August. In about this time of year, it was October, November, I don't remember exact, but it starts to get cool and he goes to turn on the furnace and it won't work. So he calls up the home warranty company. So he first called me, hey, the furnace isn't working. And I said, perfect. That's why we put a home warranty on it. Call the home warranty company. He calls them. They go out and they look at it and they said, oh, there's a cracked combustion chamber and we don't cover that. Well, the home warranty company that I would have ordered the home warranty through did cover the cracked combustion chamber. And so he now was saying to me, so what am I going to do? And I said, oh, I don't know. I mean, you're kind of stuck. Luckily, I think we ended up getting them to pay a portion of it towards fixing it for them. But that for me, after that experience is when I started deciding I want to make sure when I'm representing the buyer that it is my home warranty company that I trust and have a relationship with, because I know what they'll cover and what they want and what they'll do for me. So I've never, after that, if the seller has said, well, we've already ordered one, I always just go, no, we want ours to cover, be the one that I use because I know what I'm dealing with. So anyway, that's how I like to deal with it. So, all right. Any other concerns on that page? Okay. We'll fast forward to the next page. So the next page, the only thing we're going to be dealing with on this page is section 15. What are you, concerns or no concerns on section 15? Yeah, you got to check one of them. Which one should we check? Marissa's like, I'm not answering anymore.
May at the option of.
So I hear one for May. David's saying shall. So we have one may, one shall. Who's going to break the tie?
Two shall.
All right, we got two shalls. What about the rest of you guys? Somebody who hasn't participated. Aaron's saying shall. And she's saying shall per Century 21. What if I were to say Even though Aaron just said per century 21. No, wait, Luciana, did you change? Because you said May, didn't you?
No, I always choose shall.
Who was
I-
it? Somebody said, who said May?
I did. Brittany Carver.
Oh, it was Brittany. Okay, thanks, Brittany. All right. They're all against you, Brittany. What do you think? Except for now Philip's saying May.
I always say may, because if you say shall, if there's a problem, you have to go to mediation when you might not have to, or lawyer fees and stuff. But may is something you can choose to do it, or you can choose not to do it. You're not forced to do it.
Okay. So Tim in the chat box says, trick question, no. I'm gonna go, I know, that's what I was gonna say. No what, Tim?
It's not choosing anything.
No boxes? Tim's saying May. So Tim is correct. It kind of is a trick question that I gave to you guys. There's not a right answer. The right answer is there's not a right
I'm not
answer.
answering anymore.
Marissa's done. No matter what she does. See, well, that's why you didn't find any problems, see? Okay. Yeah, there is not a right answer. So here's what I mean. For years and years, when I would teach this class, we had an attorney at a different company that I was with, and that attorney had initially said they should check shall. So I would come to this class and I'd say, you guys should do shall. That attorney then left our company and went somewhere else, and a new attorney came to our company. And that attorney came in and was like, why are you telling people shall? And I said, well, because Rob, the old attorney, said we should do shall. And he said, no, you want to do may on this. You should do may every time. So then I would come into the classes and I'd start teaching. I'd be like, okay, you guys, you should check the box may on this, because, and the reason I was teaching it was based on what you said, Brittany, which is that you may not always want to go to mediation. And if you check the box shall, and you go to court, the first question the judge is going to ask is, did you go to mediation? And if you said no, he's going to kick you out and say, go do that, then come back, because you got to follow the contract. So that attorney said, teach May. So I started teaching May. Well, then that attorney left and we got a new attorney. And that attorney came in and said, why are you teaching May? And I said, well, because the last attorney told me I should teach May. And I said, and the one before that said do shall. And then this one said, no, what you should do is explain it to your client, what it means, and then let them decide. So for me, the right answer now is explain to your client that if you check shall, you have to. Now, what would be the downside? So I'll ask Brittany, because I think you might have the right answer, but we'll see. What would be the downside to checking shall? So I think you kind of started to say it, Brittany.
You gotta get lawyers involved.
Did we lose you? Are you muted? You don't want to participate anymore like Marissa?
But May is risky too, because you don't know. what-
Okay, I guess we lost Brittany. I don't know. Or she just doesn't want to answer. Okay, here's the downside. For me, most of the time, the disputes that we have, most contractual disputes are typically over the earnest money. So if the earnest money was $1,000 and you check the shall box, you shall go to mediation, you're going to have to pay for that mediation, which could essentially eat up a significant portion, if not all, of that earnest money. So now we're going to go to mediation to argue over the earnest money, but the mediator's going to get all the money, so it didn't really matter. Kind of thing. So for me, that's the downside to checking the shall box. But now the flip side of that, though, is if it ends up being a bigger issue, you might wish you had checked the shall box to have gone to mediation first. So it is a tough thing. And typically what's going to happen is your client's going to say, well, what should I do? So what's the answer? Yeah, it's just, for me, I guess what I would say is So Tim says, does anyone really want to go to mediation? And yeah, good point. So for me personally, I will tell you, for me personally, just based on my experience in the business and things, if I were writing this contract for myself, I would do it as me. Just because it seems like most of the disputes are over that earnest money, and I don't really want to eat up the earnest money. But like I say, you could also come back and have a different scenario where like, oh, I wish I would have done shall. So, all right, we spent way longer on that than I intended. Any other concerns on that page? Nobody's participating in anything anymore. Like nobody's, I'm not answering any questions. Am I muted? Can you guys not hear me anymore? All right, Philip said no. Oh, say that again. You're right this time. Say it again.
Perfect. After 10 tries. The buyer's initials and date are not on that one.
Good. All right. Notice we missed the initials and the date here on this page. So good job. You got that one. All right. So yeah, we missed the initials and date right there. So we got to make sure we have that. So here's what I recommend. The reason I threw this one in here. Before you submit this, whether you're doing it in dot loop or you're having your clients actually sign it in person, however you're doing it, before you either send it to them in dot loop or they leave you if they're signing in person, flip through the page and make sure, because a lot of times people end up missing it. And I've had scenarios even with dot loop where I just forgot to go and assign an initial to one of them. Or the most recent one that I had was I had sent it off to the person but forgot to assign. It was a scenario where it just said the buyer can initial here, and this was no big deal. But because I hadn't assigned the section to the buyer of where to sign, when the buyer went through and signed it, there were 2 buyer spots, and she initialed both sections. So it's like the buyer had initialed twice on that one page, which is not a big deal, but just, and what happened though is when I went to send it on dot loop, it'll tell you how many fields they need to address or to initial or sign. And I was sending just an addendum and it said 3. So I went back into the addendum and I looked at it and I was like, there's not 3 initials. Why is it saying 3? And I couldn't figure it out. So I just sent it. I'm like, oh, well, she initialed 3 times. And then when it came back, I figured out that's what it was, is it had her initial both of these boxes right here that are on the box. So anyway. All right, next page. On this page, a section, we're just going to go right to section. Actually, before we go to section 24, I do want to, I know Rob already said this, but I want to point it out again because it's just so crucial you guys understand. In section 23, there are 2 things that have to happen for acceptance to take place. What are they?
The seller has to sign and return the acceptance offer.
Okay, so they have to sign is the first one. What's the
And
second?
everything has to be communicated to all parties.
Oh, Brittany, you came back. Did we lose you or you just didn't want to answer me before?
I
You're not answering me again. Okay, that's fine. I'm just giving you a hard time.
No, I'm sorry. I keep losing cell phone service.
Oh, okay. I was asking you a question and you had dropped off, I guess, during that time. So I was like, all right, I guess she doesn't want to answer.
I'm sorry. I'm still here.
Okay, cool. All right, so now let's go then to so that is correct. So for section 23 has to be signed and communicated. Now, I just had one recently where in the process of negotiating, the seller, we had sent off to get the seller's signature in dot loop. They signed it and it came back, but we had not yet communicated it to the buyer that we had accepted. And another offer came in right after or as the seller was signing. And the new offer actually was a little bit better. So we still wanted that the person who the seller had signed the contract with, we still wanted to sell it to them. But this other offer was for a little bit more money. So because it had been signed but not communicated yet, we called up the one that the
seller had just signed, the buyer, and said, we just got an offer that is $8,000 higher than yours. And that's what it was. It was $8,000 more. And we would rather sell the property to you guys. But if we can get $8,000, we're going to go sell it to somebody else. So will you up your offer to $8,000? And he said, yes. Great. Send us over a new offer with it being that much higher. So even though our seller had already signed it, we just then tore it up and waited for the new offer to come in and then signed it and sent it back. So just keep in mind, it's signed and communicated. Those are the two things that have to happen, okay? All right, section 24. Any concerns on the dates there? All right, I'm hearing nothing. So we're gonna assume you're good with those dates. And here's, what?
About right.
Yeah, that's pretty good. So let me tell you kind of how I go through and do this. So went back, clear back in section 4. Remember I said I would come back to the, or not 4, 3, possession, 3.3. Remember we talked about the possession? I said I'll come back to that. For me, when I get to that section, how I like to do it is when I'm filling it out is I like to call the buyer, or if they're on the phone with me or I'm talking to them in person, I like to ask them, when do you want to move in? And when they tell me when they want to move in, I then will adjust these dates according to when they want to move in. So if I found out that they wanted to move in, let's say on, let me just look at a calendar here real quick. Let's say they wanted to move in, if we were writing the offer today, and they were saying, hey, we want to be in before Christmas. So let's say that they wanted to move in on Saturday, December 19th, okay? Because typically the lender's going to need probably three weeks-ish, but that gives us about a month. So let's say they want to move in on Saturday the 19th. Then I'm going to look at that, and let's assume we had put 24 hours, but it doesn't really matter too much. If that was the case, then I typically am going to say, okay, if they want to move in on Saturday the 19th, most of the time, it's going to fund and record the day after they sign. But the contract allows how many days for it to fund and record? Do you guys remember? We didn't talk about it today, but it's back in section 3, 3.2. I'll just give you the answer.
4 calendar days.
Good job. Yes, 4 calendar days. So from when they sign to still be within contract, you've got 4 calendar days in which to have it fund, all the money to change hand and get it recorded. So because of that, I usually just, even though I know it's usually going to give them, it's usually going to happen next day. Well, so if we had said 24 hours like we did on the contract, they want to move in on the 19th, that would mean that it needed to fund and record by the 18th, which would mean we probably needed to sign on the 17th. But what happens if they're wanting to move in on the 19th and for some reason it ended up didn't fund and record the next day, it took another day? Well, now all of a sudden we're not getting, they can't start to move in until the 20th, which is Sunday, but they are planned for the Saturday. So because of that, for me, if my client wants to move in on Saturday, I will usually set up my settlement deadline to be either the 14th or the 15th. So the Monday or the Tuesday. And the idea of that again being, is your client, is the seller, or excuse me, the buyer ever going to complain if you could get them the keys before the date they wanted to move in? Probably not. But are they going to complain if they're planning to move in on the 19th and you can't take possession until the 20th or the 21st or 22nd even? So for me, if they want to move in on the Saturday, I always try to do my closing either the Monday or the Tuesday. And typically I will do the Tuesday before. This is typically how I will do it. That way we go sign on the Tuesday. It will probably fund and record on the Wednesday. 24 hours later, they can take possession on the Thursday. But if for some reason it took an extra day, now we can still get it on Friday, is kind of the way that I go about it. But if you really want to be safe, do it on the Monday. Now, here's the other reason I like doing it on Monday or Tuesday. So now let's think from the seller's perspective. If you're the seller and you're going to sign on Tuesday and it's gonna fund and record on Wednesday, and you gotta be out on Thursday, when typically is the seller gonna move out? What do you think? Yeah, they're typically probably going to do it on the weekend. They typically want the weekend so they don't have to take time off of work either, which, so if they have to be out on Thursday, when are they probably gonna move out? Hopefully, yeah, that's my thinking and structuring it the way I do is, yeah, what you're saying is right, Rebecca, is I'm assuming they're going to move out the weekend before, which is a lot of times, that's why when I say Monday or Tuesday, if you do it on Monday, there's a pretty good chance the seller assumes they're getting paid on Monday, they'll get moved out over the weekend. That's why I like to do it that way. So now let's go to section 24 based on that. So I would do my settlement deadline, we'll say the 14th since it's November 14th here, but it would have been the December the 14th in the case I was just saying in 2020, not 2017. So if I put that there as the 14th, then I usually will work backwards on these dates. So if that's the case, when would we want our finance and appraisal deadline to be? So I like the idea. I mean, this says the 10th. I'm good with the 10th. Maybe the 11th. But here's the thing for me. Think of it this way. On the loan, Marissa, you're going to totally get this one right because it's more of a lender question. What does the lender have to do 3 days before you're going to sign?
They have to send them a copy of the appraisal.
And
Send out closing disclosures.
oh, good job. Yeah, they got to send out the disclosures. So for me on a listing side, so I told you guys that we're signing today on this property that's up the street from my house that I was helping my neighbor sell. The biggest thing that I have been so frustrated about is they had not sent out the disclosure. So when we were supposed to sign last Monday, so a week ago from yesterday, but I knew when on Thursday they hadn't sent out the disclosures that it wasn't going to happen. And so for me, on my when I'm on the buy side, I'm going to put my finance and appraisal deadline typically the 3 days before we're going to sign. And Sundays don't count. Saturdays do, Sundays don't. So I'm going to back into it and say, if that on that date, the closing disclosure hasn't been sent out, there's probably a problem. And I want to know what it is. So for me, that's what I'm going to do on my finance and appraisal deadline is I'm going to back out 3 days, not counting Sunday, and from the date of settlement and put that as my finance and appraisal. Now, on my seller due diligence and or seller disclosure and the due diligence, I typically on seller disclosure deadline, I'm going to put it out just a couple of days from when we are, usually I say 3 to 5 days. And I'm going to err more on the side of the 3 days than the 5, but somewhere around that. And to some extent, the reason I say 3 to 5 is depending on the day that I'm writing the offer, I typically just don't want to have to deal with it on a Saturday or a Sunday. So if I'm on the buy side, I usually am going to put it 3 to 5 days out. And the reason again on that is I'll either put it the Friday or the Monday, just because I'm hoping to not have to deal with it on the weekend. So that's how I decide. Then due diligence deadline, I'm going to do 10 to 14 days. And I usually err on the side of 14 days out from where we're writing the contract so that we have time to get it done. All right. Oh, let me say one other thing before I ask if you have any questions. The way a lot of times I hear people teach this is the way I will hear people teach it is do your seller disclosure 7 days out, your due diligence 14 and financing and appraisal 21, and then close 28 or 30 days out. That's fine. You can do it that way. I just usually, based on what I told you about financing and appraisal deadline, I like to give myself a little more time than having that finance and appraisal deadline be a week before settlement or a week or 10 days, whatever people usually are saying. Because I like to structure it based on, I want to know that if the seller disclosure has been sent out, the disclosures from the lender have been sent out, the deal has happened. If they haven't been, I'm not sure it's happening. So for me, I want to make sure I'm protected that way. That's the only reason I do it that way, rather than, it's easier to think 7, 14, 21, 28. That's easy to think about. but it also puts their earnest money potentially at risk. All right. Any questions on section 24? All right, section 25 then. Any concerns there? No. Okay, so here's what I do. Let me tell you how I do this. And I don't know why more agents don't do this. And in fact, it frustrates me when I'm on the listing side and an agent doesn't do this. Remember I said that I'm going to call the listing agent when I'm the buyer's agent to ask a few questions? The other question I like to ask is, how long do you need to get me a response? And when I'm on the listing side, I appreciate it, especially this one that we're closing on or going to go sign on today. She's living in a senior living center. She is not computer savvy at all. We've done nothing with .loop on it because I have to go get her to sign all the time. Well, the challenge is, if you sent me an offer and you gave me so long to respond, I don't know and because she's living in a senior living center, we have to give them a heads up that we're coming, and they have to wipe down the room, and like there's all this stuff that goes on that kind of creates an issue. And during our negotiation on this deal, the agent gave me a very short window on one of the addendums, and I had to call him and say, I can't make that addendum. There's no possible way I'm going to be able to get into her to get her to sign it. So you need to give me more time. So my point being, I think it's a good idea to call and say, how much time do you need? That way you know what you're dealing with. Now, the flip side of that is, if I called and said, hey, how much time do you need? And David said to me, give me till next week. Like, I'm probably going to say, why? Why do you need till next week? Like, I want to know why. So I'm not going to automatically do if they said, give me a week, because I want to see if I can get multiple offers. Like, I don't want to do that. So I like to go call and just say, how much time do you need? Because if I was writing the offer right now, a lot of times agents will write it and just give them until noon tomorrow or 5 o'clock tomorrow. Well, if I called David and said, how long do you need? And he said, I can get myself, you get the offer to me in the next half hour, I can get you an answer by 3 o'clock. Well, then I'm probably going to give them till 4 o'clock or something. I don't want to put myself in a position of getting me end up competing. So I want to keep that window as short as I can, but I also don't want to go too far out on it, because then if they just accept it, now we got to do an addendum to fix it. So, all right. Any other concerns on that page? All right, let's go to the FHEVA. And I'm just going to ask you on this one, just to make it a little quicker. Well, first thing, actually, let me point out the date. Notice that it says, this is an addendum to the real estate purchase contract with an offer reference date of. That's where that piece that I was telling you about earlier. All right, any concerns with that top section?
I put the entire address.
Yeah, the entire address should be on there. Good. All right. What about section 1? Buyer does or does not intend to occupy the property. I always think that's one's kind of funny, because if you're doing an FHA loan, yeah, it's got to be. Obviously, there probably are some that are not, I guess, that I'm not aware of, but I've never done a loan that was an FHA that was not an owner occupied. So I don't know if that's just to try to trap you into not getting it out of you. Yeah, and I guess that is true. I guess if you were buying a fourplex, yeah. All right. Section 3, any concerns there? Well, let me explain section 3 then. On section 3 is if there are appraisal required repairs. And a lot of times agents even think this, but for sure buyers will think that when the FHA appraiser goes out, he is not doing an inspection. And a lot of people think that he's doing an inspection. They're not. They're only looking for safety issues. And that stuff has even loosened. We had an agent that had written an offer and sent it to an agent who's been an agent for maybe 40 years. And they were going to do an FHA loan. And the listing agent, who has been in the business for 40 years, called the buyer's agent, who is brand new, first offer he's written, I think, well, no, probably second or third. But the listing agent called him and said, you're not going to be able to get an FHA loan on this property because the carpets need to be replaced. And so the agent said to me, well, what do I do? The buyer's agent. And I said, he doesn't know what he's talking about. That's not going to be an issue. And I finally had to, with that agent who's been an agent for about 40 years, I had to go get an appraiser on the phone with him to say, no, I've done appraisals that didn't even have carpet. Like, it's possible in the basement, maybe somebody just wants the, so anyway, used to be that would be an issue. Today, pretty rare that you're going to come across it. So think about section 3 as being safety items. The appraiser is only looking for safety things. If there's a broken window, he's probably going to say, you got to fix it. What? Yeah, so they're typically just looking for safety kind of things. So if they see cracked or peeling paint, that's going to be an issue. But if it is not safety related, they're typically not going to have an issue. So like probably the number one thing you're going to run into on this section 3 seller appraisal required repairs is a hand railing going to the basement. That's probably the number one thing that comes up is if there's not one, the appraisers, like seriously, in my 25 years, that one has come up more than any other thing is there's not a handrail. So for me, when I'm filling this out, when I get to section 3 on this, if it's an FHA loan, I will just try to think about, were there any safety things? Is there anything that's going to be an issue safety wise? And if there is, then I'm going to put in. As a default, I usually just throw $500. But if I looked at the roof and you could see there's not a 2-year life on it, I might throw in here $5,000. And all that it is you're getting the seller to agree in advance. If the appraiser says they need to fix stuff, that they will spend up to this amount of money to fix those things. Now, the truth is, if they want to sell their house to an FHA buyer, it doesn't really matter what you put in there, they're going to have to fix it. Because if FHA requires it and the seller won't do it, the buyer's not getting an FHA loan. So, all right, section 4.
Quick question.
This one is misunderstood by a lot of people as well. Is a lot of times people will assume that this is the amount in there is what you're agreeing to spend to get a termite inspection. But that's not what that is. This is agreeing that in the event there are termites, the seller will spend up to this amount of dollars to get rid of the termites. Now, a lot of times people will say, well, in Utah, we don't have termites. We actually do have termites. It's very, very rare. In fact, I've never had a deal where there was termites, but I've had 2 times where the termite inspector went out and said, like one was in a property that was down in Sugar House that had a crawl space, and there was some cardboard in the crawl space that he said there was evidence of termites on the cardboard, and all that was required was get the cardboard out of there, and you're not going to have an issue. So I've had 2 times where it was those type of a things, where they were saying there was evidence of termites, but it was in a scenario where it was like, it was on a cardboard box that it was evidence. So get rid of the cardboard box, you get rid of the termites, basically, is what he said. So just keep in mind, section 4 is about getting rid of what they will spend to get rid of the termites, if there are termites. So I usually will throw $500 in there because, again, I've not once in 25 years come across the scenario. But if there are, it could end up being a lot higher than that. But for me, I just always try to approach it from the standpoint of, we're probably not going to have it. And if we do, the seller's probably going to have to get rid of it anyway. So I just usually put in $500. All right, section 5.1. This number, always call and ask the lender if they're expecting, if they're assuming that the buyer is going to ask for seller paid closing costs, and then you'll just put the amount based on that. Now, let me point out one thing though on this. For me, remember back in the buyer packet class, we had the $295 additional commission or admin fee. I usually will call the lender and say, how much are we going to need to ask for in closing costs? And let's say that he said 7,000, not 74.1, but let's say that he said 7,000. I would usually put in here 7,295. Or if you're doing a 595, 7,595. That way I'm asking the seller to pay that on behalf of the buyer. So anyway, that's how I use it. All right, any other concerns on that page? No, next page, which is just page 2 of the FHA addendum. Any concerns there? I'm assuming no. All right. Addendum 1 then. Let's go to addendum 1. On addendum 1, any concerns with the top, this is an addendum, it's addendum 1, offer reference date, buyer, seller, address, any concerns on any of those?
Just finish the rest of the city, state, and this.
Perfect. Finish the address. Okay, good. What about in the body of the addendum, number 1? Any concerns there?
It made me laugh out loud when I read it.
Any concerns though?
Well, yes,
All right. Marissa's saying yes and no. What? Why yes? Why no?
I don't know if you can review the product there. Maybe you can.
I would recommend not. I would say here's what I would say is, I think it's fine to say that to have the carpets professionally cleaned, but rather than saying to remove the stinky, nasty smell of cat urine, probably not a good idea to offend the seller when you're negotiating. But I would say, fine to put in there to have the carpets professionally cleaned. And you may want to even put something in there about, by a company approved by the buyer, something that way, because a lot of times what will happen is we say professionally cleaned and they might be like, well, we went down and rented a carpet cleaner and did it ourselves or whatever. Like, just make sure that you're specific on there. If the buyer wants to approve, if they're looking for something specific, make sure they put in there that specificity on it. So. All right. What about the next section there of the offer and time for acceptance? Any concerns?
Says 9:00 p.m. and in the original REPC it said 8.
Okay, good. I was hoping somebody would catch them. So notice this one says that we're giving them until 9 o'clock. The other one gave them till 8 o'clock on the FHA and the other offer. So what time is our offer and time for acceptance? Is it 8 or 9?
Say
9, because it's on the addendum.
Okay. So here's what I would say. Now this actually is still a little vague as to, so I would agree that it probably is 9 o'clock, but you could argue a little bit. So let me show you why it would be 9 o'clock. If you read in that section, it says, and this is important for you guys to remember on every addendum, to the extent the terms of this addendum modify or conflict with any provisions of the REPC, including all prior addenda and counteroffers, these terms shall control. So keep in mind, if there's ever anywhere that there is anything that modifies or conflicting, the latest addendum will rule. So the question is this really the latest addendum? So to some extent, where you see the date and time on it, we would almost have to look to see when was this one signed versus the FHAB addendum. But and if I wish I would have thought through enough, I would have waited an extra minute to sign it when I made this fake one. But they're both at the exact same time. So to some extent, you could read the FHAB addendum, which says the same thing. To the extent this addendum modifies or conflicts, this one will control. So you almost would have to see which one was signed latest to decide. But where they're both the same time, you could argue either way, I guess is what I'm saying. So probably we would err on the side of this 9 o'clock. Okay. All right. Any other concerns on that addendum? There's at least one more. You're not saying?
I'll show you. Buyer signature and the check box.
Yeah, they didn't check the box for buyer or sign it. They did initial the bottom, but didn't sign. All right. Last story quickly for you on this, and then we're done. When you are using an addendum like this, make sure, back up there into that where we had to remove the stinky, nasty smell of cat urine. Make sure that it makes sense Like when you write an addendum and you're filling it out, a lot of times what will happen is people will fill it out and it makes sense to you when you're filling it out. But it's not a bad idea to ask somebody else to read it and make sure it makes sense to them, because sometimes what will happen is the other person gets it and reads it and would interpret it differently. And so you want to make sure, like, if you're going to have me come and read it, don't bias me as to here's what we're trying to do. Does this make sense? Instead, take it to them and say, read this and tell me what your understanding of what we're saying is. You want to make sure that it's worded properly. So let me give you a quick example of that, of what's going on right now. And I think Rob might have mentioned this. I don't know. So I apologize if he did. But what is happening is people right now, because of how competitive the market is, they are writing on an addendum. But in the event the property doesn't appraise, buyer will pay in cash $1,000 or $2,000 or $7,000, whatever, above the appraised value for the property. Okay, well, to me, what that means is in the event the property doesn't appraise for the above list price that we've offered, the buyer will make up the difference of $5,000 or whatever, up to whatever the purchase price was. Well, some people would look at that and say, okay, yeah, I agree with that. What happens though now if it appraises for $30,000 less than the list price? The buyer's going to argue, you agreed, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, that we would pay you cash and that you would sell it to us for whatever $7,000, let's say, above the appraised value. The buyer's thinking that the seller has now agreed, even though it appraised for, like, essentially the buyer's saying the seller has now agreed to sell it for whatever $7,000, whatever the above or appraised value is. So if it now appraised for $30,000 less than the list price, even, the buyer's saying, great, I just got a good deal on this property. Well, technically not in their mind because it didn't appraise, but the seller's going, I didn't agree to that. I didn't agree to go 30,000 less. Well, but did they? What do you guys think? Did they or did they not? Like, I'm not answering.
It's a tricky question.
So Dave's saying yes, they did. See, for me, I still would say, what was the intent? I think a judge is going to look at is what was your intent? The intention is to say, we offered 30,000 above list price, and we're saying if it doesn't appraise for that, if it only appraises for 10,000 above list, we'll pay you an extra 7,000. That's what I believe the intent was. But the buyer's going to argue, well, no, we said we would do. So that's the point, though, of making sure when you're writing this stuff out, be careful. Number one, because we're not attorneys. But number two is you want to make sure it's clear and makes sense to people. Otherwise, this is how we end up in a lawsuit, is because the buyer is going to say, no, you agreed to selling it for 7,000 above the list price if it didn't appraise for the purchase price. And the seller's saying, no, you had an appraisal condition in there that said if it failed to appraise, that you would get the earnest money back and da-da-da-da-da. And they're saying, no, that overrides because remember, if it modifies or conflicts. So this is where it can get ugly. So make sure if you're on the listing side, that you are saying that in the event the property doesn't appraises for, it's fine to say they'll pay $7,000 above the appraised value. And then, but maybe having them comment, if it fails to appraise for the purchase price, we will, section 8.3 applies. Something that way. So the point is, if you're going to write that kind of stuff, get somebody else to look at it, make sure it makes sense. That you don't get yourself into a scenario where, oh crap, did we just sell it for 30,000 below what they thought? All right, any other questions?
Isn't that part of the appraisal settled in the financing and appraisal deadline?
Yeah, so hopefully, but that's what the argument would be, is that somebody would argue that section 8.3 doesn't apply because what we just said on the addendum, if it modifies or conflicts, that what the addendum says rules, but somebody else might say no. So that's where it does become a little bit obscure of, yeah, is it or isn't it? I don't know. I personally think you're right that you would say no. Why did you put in what you're saying is right on. Why did you even put in a finance and appraisal deadline then if it wasn't going to apply? But they could then argue, well, no, that was just for the finance, not the appraisal. So I don't know, just make sure you're clear on it, I guess. You know, make sure somebody reads it and looks at it. And again, even back to on my sister's property, we had done that. Is I had put in there that she would pay $1,000 over the appraised value up to a certain price. That was like, I think we offered like 9,000 above their purchase price. But then it was after that I started hearing people saying, no, their buyers arguing that if it doesn't appraise. And I was like, well, be interesting on my sister's if it didn't appraise to be able to go back and say, great, we get it for 30,000 less. But to me, I went back to what was my intent. That was not my intent. And I don't think that's what most people's intention was. So, all right, Tim, shout out to me and Go Yankees. I actually do have my Yankees socks on today, even though I'm just a baseball fan. I'm not necessarily a Yankees fan. I mean, I also have some Mets socks and I have some White Sox socks. I just like baseball. So, but Tim always has to make a Yankees comment, but that's usually because Rob loves the Red Sox. All right, thanks for being here, guys. Hopefully it was helpful, good information for you. And Thursday, if you can be here in person, if you dare, I know case counts are up, but if you'll come, you can wear a mask, you can sit 6 feet away from people. We'd love to have as many people in person as we can get. Yeah, we're gonna play a game. We're doing Jeopardy, so. Although Aaron, you don't come.
I would get them as soon as you can.
Everybody else is invited. Aaron's not. Is she still on?
Well, what I really want to ask about is if we can get everything on one order, that would be great.
Oh, okay.
But I want to ask you about,
I'm trying to figure out who you're talking to, Tim, not us. I'll mute you. I thought he was talking to us. All right.
On my head, I knew so much more about
Thanks,
it.
guys. See you later. You what?
I was like, on my head, I thought I knew so much more about the Red Sea. Dang.